Fouad Signora, representing Prime Minister Saad Hariri, Excellencies, ambassadors, scholars, professors, students, friends of AUB, and the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs. Welcome to the International Conference on Exiting Violence, a conference jointly brought to you by the Fondation Maison des Sciences de l'Homme in Paris and the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. A Syrian refugee woman told me a story a couple of months ago. She lives here in a refugee camp in Lebanon. She told me, I am tired of the violence of war. I am tired of the war. I am tired of my life. So the themes of her life resonates around the themes of this conference today and in the next 2 days. Without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker for today, Michel Viviorca, professor at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, is the president of the board of the Fondation Maison des Sciences de l'Homme. From 2006 to 2010, he was president of the International Association of Sociology and has been a member of the European Research Council since 2014. His research has focused on conflict, terrorism and violence, racism, anti-Semitism, social movements, democracy, and the phenomena of cultural differences. Please join me in welcoming Professor Michel Viviorca.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank so many people and to bring my best good afternoon to so many people that I will just say good afternoon, and I hope it's enough, with just a special word to the president of this wonderful university, which is a wonderful host, and to my colleague and friend Tariq Mitri, with whom we prepared this moment. I will thank a letter at the end of this very short talk. I will also thank some other friends and colleagues and important people. I would like today just to open this moment by telling you why we decided with, I speak in English. I was supposed to speak in French, but je peux parler français peut-être? C'est mieux, hein? C'est mieux. Excuse me, I will speak in French. Arab, it's not possible, but I will speak in French. Excuse me. Because just Donc, je voudrais commencer véritablement en vous disant quelle est l'origine du processus qui nous amène à être tous ici réunis. L'origine, c'est deux processus ou deux événements de la plus haute importance. Le premier processus, ou la première série d'événements, c'est les attentats terroristes qui ont endeuillé la France. Et en particulier, en janvier 2015, des attentats d'une extrême gravité. Un magazine qui publiait des caricatures, Charlie Hebdo, et un supermarché qui vendait des produits cachers. Et donc les cibles, comme on dit, étaient ciblées. Des journalistes d'un côté, des juifs d'un autre côté. Et avec mes amis Jean-Pierre Dozon et Yvon Lebotte, qui sont l'un et l'autre ici, nous avons réfléchi et nous avons pensé qu'il fallait commencer à travailler sur ces questions en tenant compte d'un deuxième processus, non moins important. Et là, je pense plutôt à une autre partie du monde que celle-ci, la Colombie. La Colombie, où à l'époque étaient en route de très importantes négociations entre un gouvernement et une guérilla. Les négociations avec les FARC, qui ont abouti ensuite, comme vous le savez, à un accord de paix, dont aujourd'hui, évidemment, on peut se demander ce qu'il en restera compte tenu des changements qui ont lieu dans ce pays. Mais ça, c'est un autre problème. Et donc, d'un côté, une violence extrême, d'un autre côté, un processus de paix, de sortie de la violence, et nous nous sommes dit, Jean-Pierre Dozon, Yvon Lebotte et moi-même, c'est le moment de faire quelque chose. C'est le moment de réfléchir. Et à ce moment-là, nous nous sommes dit aussi que nous avions la chance unique d'appartenir à une institution, la Fondation Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, qui a toutes les capacités pour innover et pour lancer un programme de recherche qui tienne compte justement de ces deux éléments que je viens d'évoquer, la violence extrême et les processus pour essayer d'en sortir. Je vous dirai juste un mot de cette fondation que je dirige avec Jean-Pierre Dauzon, Nicolas Cazaras, que je salue également. Cette fondation a été créée il y a un peu plus d'un demi-siècle par un très grand historien, Fernand Braudel, et il reste de sa création un certain nombre de principes tout à fait importants. Nous veillons à ce que nos activités scientifiques soient internationales. Nous refusons ce qu'un collègue allemand appelait, Ulrich Beck appelait, le nationalisme méthodologique, qui consiste à s'enfermer uniquement dans l'étude de sa propre société. Nous sommes très spontanément pluridisciplinaires. Nous étudions des problèmes. Nous ne sommes pas là pour faire vivre telle ou telle théorie sociologique, anthropologique ou autre. Mais nous avons d'autres qualités, je crois. Nous faisons ce que d'autres institutions universitaires, en tout cas en France, sont mal outillées pour le faire. Nous développons des programmes de recherche innovants, nous développons des activités expérimentales, nous prenons des initiatives que les autres institutions du tissu auquel nous appartenons ne peuvent pas ou ne souhaitent pas ou ne peuvent faire que très, très insuffisamment. Nous avons un rôle d'incubation, c'est-à-dire que nous donnons naissance à des nouveaux processus de recherche, et puis quand ces processus sont bien installés, bien lancés, eh bien, ils se poursuivent en dehors de chez nous. Fernand Braudel s'intéressait au monde et pas simplement à la France. Nous utilisons beaucoup l'expression de pensée globale. Nous aimons bien réfléchir globalement. Et enfin, et ça c'est plus récent, nous sommes très soucieux de mettre en relation l'analyse et l'action, la recherche et les acteurs politiques, les acteurs sociaux, la puissance publique, l'État, mais aussi les ONG, les travailleurs sociaux, les médecins, etc. Pour nous, c'est quelque chose de tout à fait important. Et non seulement nous avons le souci de mettre en relation l'analyse et l'action, mais nous avons aussi le souci de diffuser les connaissances que nous produisons ou que nous contribuons à produire. Et ce souci fait que nous prenons des initiatives en direction des médias, qu'il s'agisse des médias classiques ou qu'il s'agisse évidemment de tout ce qui est aujourd'hui numérique. Et donc, 2015, une violence extrême qui attendait ses analyses, sa compréhension. Ça n'était pas évident, d'un côté. Et d'un autre côté, ce processus de paix en Amérique latine, où on peut dire que les FARC étaient pratiquement la dernière guérilla importante qui mêlait des activités à finalité plutôt politique et d'autres à finalité plutôt crapuleuse, trafic de drogue. Et donc, nous nous sommes dit, nous allons lancer un programme de recherche qui va nous permettre, d'une part, d'analyser la violence et d'autre part, de transformer les connaissances qui existent sur la prévention et la sortie de la violence, de les transformer en domaine de recherche. Je dis cela parce que beaucoup de gens travaillent dans les processus qui mènent à la paix, pour prévenir la violence, font du peacekeeping, du nation building, etc. Mais tout ceci n'est pas un domaine pour les sciences humaines et sociales. Tout ceci est beaucoup plus un ensemble de pratiques, des gens souvent exceptionnels. Ce n'est pas du tout une critique que je suis en train de faire, des gens d'une très grande qualité que l'on rencontre parmi des diplomates, parmi des magistrats, parmi des médecins, des psychiatres, parmi des consultants, des experts, enfin des gens extrêmement diversifiés, mais dont l'activité est professionnelle. Il s'agit, d'une façon ou d'une autre, de contribuer à la paix et non pas de produire des connaissances. Et donc notre idée a été de mobiliser un assez grand nombre de chercheurs pour en même temps produire des connaissances sur la violence et produire et transformer, je vais le dire ainsi, transformer ce domaine qui est un domaine pratique en domaine de recherche, la sortie et la prévention de la violence. Alors comment est-ce que nous avons fait ? Nous avons mis en place un panel d'une centaine de chercheurs. Ces chercheurs se sont répartis en une dizaine de groupes thématiques. Chaque groupe envisage un aspect particulier des questions qui nous intéressent, mais tout ceci s'inscrit dans une réflexion d'ensemble. Chaque groupe est pluridisciplinaire, chaque groupe est international. Les groupes ont travaillé indépendamment, mais il y a eu aussi déjà 2 moments de rencontre. Un premier moment à l'occasion du lancement de ce programme, en janvier 2016, un deuxième moment à l'occasion d'une rencontre organisée à Tunis il y a presque un an. Et donc, des moments de synthèse en quelque sorte et des moments où chaque groupe travaille de son côté. Et il y a à peu près un an, à l'occasion de réflexions sur la qualité de notre programme et sur notre capacité à le faire aller plus avant, j'ai fait la connaissance personnelle de Tariq Mitri. Nous nous sommes très bien entendus et nous avons décidé ensemble de clore ce programme, cet ensemble de recherches, par un colloque qui se tiendrait ici. Et donc, ça n'est pas le hasard si nous nous retrouvons aujourd'hui. Alors, je voudrais ne pas être trop long. Je voudrais donc bien insister sur le double objectif de notre panel, analyser la violence, constituer la sortie et la prévention de la violence en domaine de recherche. Ça ne va pas de soi, d'un côté comme de l'autre, mais en plus, on ne circule pas forcément automatiquement de l'analyse de la violence à l'analyse de la sortie de la violence. Ce n'est pas la même chose. Mais en même temps, ça entretient des liens. Donc ça pose des belles et grandes questions qui vont être abordées, je pense, au cours de nos réunions. Une originalité de nos réunions, vous l'avez bien compris, c'est de mettre ensemble des chercheurs et des praticiens qui ont des préoccupations différentes et qui viennent d'horizons très différents. Je trouve formidable que lors d'un même colloque, le spécialiste de la négociation en Colombie entre la guérilla et le gouvernement participe à des discussions avec le spécialiste du salafisme au Moyen-Orient. Je trouve ça tout à fait utile, stimulant et intéressant. Donc, que ça se passe à Beyrouth, ça me semble encore magique presque, et en tout cas tout à fait beau. Alors voilà ce que je voulais vous dire. Nous avons, Tariq Mitri et moi-même, organisé ça, je dirais, en phase intellectuelle, en phase institutionnelle et en phase personnelle, amicale, et je crois que c'est une très bonne chose. Alors, il me reste, pour terminer cette très brève introduction, à vous dire que nous allons poursuivre ensuite, après cette rencontre, nous poursuivrons certainement ces activités. Nous les poursuivrons aussi sous la forme d'une nouvelle revue. Vous avez dans les sacs qui vous sont distribués un petit document qui présente ce projet de revue, auquel un certain nombre de ceux qui sont ici vont participer. Une revue qui sera publiée en anglais sur papier et en français et en anglais en ligne. Donc nous continuerons à diffuser, à disséminer, comme on dit parfois, les connaissances. Et je voudrais, pour terminer, remercier plus particulièrement les personnalités et les institutions qui nous soutiennent, à commencer, puisqu'il est ici par mon ami Malak Bachar, qui est le président de la Fondation d'Abran au Kurdistan irakien et qui a soutenu ce projet très tôt. Je voudrais remercier également la Carnegie Corporation, qui a eu un rôle tout à fait décisif pour que nous puissions avancer dans ce programme, des institutions françaises, le CGET, le CSFRS, et je dirais même l'État français, puisqu'il finance la fondation que je préside. Je voudrais vous dire aussi que des équipes formidables ont travaillé. Alors, je ne connais pas le nom de tous les membres des équipes libanaises et toute l'équipe de cette université, mais elle a fait un travail merveilleux, je tiens à le dire. Côté français, je peux citer quelques noms. Adi Jazouli, qui a été infatigable, avec Vlad Berindey, avec In Ben Fares, avec Perrine, que je me trompe toujours, Perrine Claveau, je me trompe toujours un tout petit peu, et j'y adjoindrai volontiers Sabrina Melnotte, qui n'est pas tout à fait au cœur de ce programme, mais qui donne aussi un coup de main très, très fréquent. Et donc, voilà, je pense vous avoir donné une image de ce que nous essayons de faire ensemble et du climat qui est à la fois scientifique, intellectuel et amical dans lequel nous souhaitons que ces journées se poursuivent et qu'ensuite les initiatives puissent se prolonger. Voilà, je vous remercie de votre patience. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Michel, for your words, which resonate with all of us here. Our second speaker for today is President Fadlu Khouri President Fadl Khouri is the 16th president of the university and assumed office in September 2015. Dr. Khouri was professor and chairman of the Department of Hematology and Medical Oncology at Emory University School of Medicine. President Fadl Khouri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Excellencies, former Prime Minister and AUB alumnus Fouad Sanyura, representing Prime Minister Saad Hariri. I don't see Bruno, but our ambassador, Bruno Fouché, we expected him here. Your Excellency Sayyid Muhammad Ali Al-Hakim, Secretary General of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, a good friend of Lebanon and the region. His Excellency Signor Philippe Lazzarini, President of the Fondation Maison de Sciences de l'Homme, Dr. Michel Vivorka, members of the AUB community and guests. It's a great pleasure to welcome you today to AUB for these conferences of the International Panel on Exiting Violence. This has been building momentum for a while, and this is something of a conclusion. It's very important work, and as Dr. Michel pointed out, there's a difference between the science of violence and the science of exiting violence, and that's something that is often confused. There's been more than 100 researchers from multiple disciplines looking at this challenge, and this probably is the challenge not just of this age, but of any age. And shortly after this talk, I'll be leaving you to listen to a very interesting talk by Margaret Macmillan, the great historian, and Dame Margaret's talk called The Mark of Cain is about how, unfortunately, conflict often fuels progress in history. But we're here in the Middle East, in Lebanon, in Beirut, and at AUB, and we've had plenty of violence and conflict and maybe not quite so much progress. In fact, the region and the university has often been a focal point for shock-inducing violence. Several of our academic and administrative leaders have been victims of kidnappings and assassinations, including our close family friend and my predecessor, Malcolm Kerr. We've had buildings damaged. College Hall, where I work, was blown up and rebuilt. And even students recently, or intended students, have been wounded or worse by armed actors and others. So I think we can safely say that the region, we are experts in violence, but not so much on exiting violence. And why does it matter, exiting violence? I'm going to stray a little bit from my speech, because if you look at the history of mankind, just the recent history, the 20th century, and you look at how Europe exited violence after World War I with essentially nothing resolved, like a heavyweight battle waiting to be resumed, or after World War II, which saw the construction of a far different Europe, and I would argue a far more promising future, it's clearly vital that we grasp this concept of exiting violence as a science, as something that we can measure and learn from. From our perspective in the wider region, it is vital because we're currently stuck in a cycle of violence, terrible violence in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Libya, with the occupation of the Palestinian land and the subjugation of the rights of a people by the State of Israel, in the repression of authoritarian governments throughout the area, in inter-ethnic conflict, in all of these areas, and there you see the crystallization of the common phenomenon, which is accelerated and enhanced violence against women, children, and vulnerable populations. In 2016, the World Bank put out a report saying that 87 million people from the MENA region, more than a fifth of this population from 4 countries, were directly affected by war. This report sought to quantify how much better people off these people would be if we just took the simple exit from non-democracy to democracy, something I take issue with because we've seen that the most successful modern democracies have transitioned carefully to democracy. Now, you may find this strange coming from someone who's lived most of his life in the United States, but democracy does not come easily or bloodlessly. And we've seen the transition of India, which appears to be a lasting engraftment, and we've seen accelerations such as that in Lebanon, which were less successful. So exiting violence is indeed a fundamental objective that all of us should benefit from and should work towards. But I think it's premature to assume that things that work in the West are necessarily fully adaptable to the East. We need more data. And what we do here at AUB is we take the best and the brightest kids and we teach them to analyze data so that they can conclude for themselves what the truth is. And the truth is not what your teacher tells you. The truth is what you see, what you understand, and what you convince yourself of. So the International Panel on Exiting Violence, as I indicated, is a multidisciplinary community of researchers and specialists from the world with expertise in anthropology, sociology, political science, philosophy, history, psychology, psychiatry, and other areas. And while violence and prevention or reduction of violence has long been a focus of study in different areas, what's unique and critical about the IPEV is it approaches the topic from the standpoint of studying the parameters of exiting violence as well as seeking how to mitigate and avoid it. It takes a more scientific and disciplinarian approach and then combines it into a multidisciplinary whole. I think these are vital reflections. We can be sure that one day this region will exit violence. How you exit is just as important on some manner as exiting. And I'm going to give you a few examples. Rwanda. Rwanda, less than 15 years ago, was the scene of one of the greatest genocides of the late 20th century, all in 4 or 5 months. But this is a country that got together, studied what had been done, recognizing it did not have the ability to adjudicate and to heal on a federal level. They set up community judges and community councils, and they've now exited violence successfully in their growth rate of their GDP. If GDP does indeed mean anything, as Bobby Kennedy once speculated, annually at over 6% with a knowledge-based economy. Lebanon, on the other hand, has exited violence in an entirely different manner, with a sublimation of the history of the war to the extent that it's not even taught in textbooks. In fact, even at AUB, I would ask my good friend Tariq Mitri and my good friend Sari Hanafi if we have any courses on the Lebanese civil war that can take a contemporary and unchallenged view. No, we don't. So this is the challenge. The committee, the 10 working groups of the International Panel, have already brought together some fascinating new perspectives related to the objective of exiting from violence. These comparative approaches to both radicalization and de-radicalization are very important because they can produce more nuanced and actionable data than have been available for use in previous de-escalations in the face of the real grievances. The recommendations include listening to Muslim voices and avoiding neo-Orientalist delusions, and these have been identified as critical guidelines. There are also tracks on separatism and state building, public policy, justice and reconciliation, and discrepancies in the strength of different states. And last December, I was fortunate to attend and to speak at a conference on fragile states. And at that conference, Prime Minister, I noticed that Jordan was listed as a fragile state. And in my constant optimism, I said, but Jordan is the most stable state in the Middle East. Well, Jordan has had riots and street violence for the last several weeks. And I think it's fair to say that there is not one state from Turkey to Afghanistan that doesn't in some way qualify as a fragile state. We live in a world of fragile states. And we have to understand the underpinnings of violence as well as how to exit it. Considering Lebanon's experience since the Civil War, the country has stayed away from violence. Whether we approve of the method that it has stayed away from violence, it's still vital to note that it has developed its own mechanisms, and these are worth studying. The subject, though, needs to be taught in history classes and philosophy classes. It needs to be taught in civil society. Because one of the things that the panel identified, and I've been trying to read up on your work over the last few days leading up to this, is the importance of allowing the collective memory to absorb in order to heal. This is something that we keep repeating because this part of the world, and I include the entire region in my statement, has lacked the kind of historic, occasional leadership where a single leader such as de Gaulle was able to lead France away from Algeria. It was a bloody exit, but it was a final exit, and it was an exit that was better for both states. Same with Nehru's careful and judicious prosecution of the Indian-Pakistan situation. It avoided far greater violence. So we have our challenges in front of us, because it's hard to recall a leading statesman or woman in this region who adhered to the example of servant leadership best described in Tennyson's Tithonus: man comes and tills the field and lies beneath. So these are some of the many questions that you will be asking in the next few days. They precede the issuing of the final report from IPEV in November 2018, which I look forward to reading its entirety, because I'm sure its recommendations will be widely disseminated with a view to informing and guiding action on the ground. Here at the university, we've tried to lead from the front. We've had free and fair elections and debates. We've even created a favorite bogeyman, yours truly, for the faculty and students and staff. As I said, it's always safe to challenge authority, non-violently. But we have to thank the serious scholars assembled here. I think the organizers and the researchers from the Fondation Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, from the Essam Ferris Institute for Public Policy, the support of the Carnegie Corporation of New York, and frankly, the permissive, in the best sense of the phrase, permissive atmosphere of this university to allow for serious work on this topic to take place. So in conclusion, I want to thank you. I want to wish you well. I'm sure this meeting will be vigorous and rigorous, that you'll have your debates and your disagreement, but that you'll be able to prosecute them non-violently and in the most collegial spirit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Fadlo, for reminding us the role of academia. Our next speaker, Dr. Tariq Mitri, is the director of the Essam Ferris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs. He was the special representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Libya from 2012 to 2014. From 2005 to 2011, he served in 4 successive Lebanese governments as Minister of Environment, Administrative Reform, Culture, Information, and Active Minister for Foreign Affairs. Please, Dr. Mitri.
Thank you, Dawlat al-Rais, Prime Minister Senora, representing Prime Minister Saad Hariri, Mr. President, Your Excellencies. I'm very pleased to welcome you all in Beirut for this special conference, an unconventional one, as some of you may suggest. We will be harvesting 2 years of work and trying to bring the diversity of approaches to exiting violence into an integrated whole. This is far from being an easy task, as we are all increasingly aware that such a debate will continue for quite a while. It goes without saying that this conference does not pretend to assert conclusions. Many questions will remain with us, but will be addressed differently, more clearly, even if not affirmatively. I'm equally pleased, on behalf of Essam Ferris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut, to co-organize this conference with La Fondation Maison des Sciences de l'Homme in Paris, who mobilized a remarkable group of people, remarkable intellectual energies from many countries in Europe and beyond. Our share at AUB in contributing to the study project materialized in convening a group of Arab academics to examine the genesis, causes, and manifestations of violence in our region in relation to the role of the state. On a practical note, our staff at the Institute and interns did not spare any effort or time for a good number of weeks to bring us to this day. I would like to express my deep gratitude to them for their dedication and efficiency. The spirit of collaboration with the staff of la Fondation Maison des Sciences de l'Homme is equally laudable. Un grand merci à nos amis et collègues parisiens. As an institute whose primary mission is to facilitate exchanges and dialogue between knowledge producers and policy makers, we are most attentive to the relevance of academic research to public life. It's our hope that this conference will not be a traditional conversation among like-minded people discussing problems within the confines of their specific disciplines, technical languages, and methodologies, but a deliberation meant to speak to a wider audience and impact our complex and painful realities. For us, policy dialogue, such as the one we will try to have in these coming days, needs to avert two drawbacks. The first drawback is to assume that the concern of researchers and that of policymakers are one and the same when it comes to exiting violence. The second drawback is to perceive serious academics and experienced practitioners as two separate groups facing each other. In the first case, researchers turn into docile experts, resembling court intellectuals, responding to specific requests and rewarded by bridging the gap between reflection and action, but losing much of their independence. In the second case, they isolate themselves and may fall into irrelevance and develop the illusory self-sufficiency of interaction among peer academics. It's therefore essential to engage in a relationship between producers of scientific knowledge and decision takers and opinion makers without confusing roles while trying to ensure a benefit for both actors. Issues of radicalization and efforts towards de-radicalization have been widely and sometimes confusingly have been discussed in recent academic production. To be sure, information and analysis have accumulated in recent years, but a comprehensive knowledge and the wisdom to act responsibly is still to develop. May this conference help us move forward in drawing on existing research and elaborating informed and creative policies. For some time, we regrettably missed among many academics focusing on Islamic jihadism or terrorism an avowed interest in a comparative approach. Links between political violence and criminal violence were understudied. Our international panel is a step in offsetting this deficit, a significant one, even if not conclusive. In the work of its research groups, necessary distinctions between religious motivations and religious legitimation were often made. Emphasis has been laid on differentiating between the end of massive cruelty and the exit from violence. They're not the same. Modes of individual persuasion, manipulation, and subsequent recruitment of fighters have not been separated in a number of cases from expressions of community appeal. Some governmental and non-governmental policies of de-radicalization tended to overstate the use of psychological theories, and some empirical research related to psychology risking to underestimate the indispensable use of sociological investigation. But in this international panel, sociological inquiry into radicalization processes and options for de-radicalization occupies a central part, thus limiting the influence of some trendy political studies inclined to overstate the importance of perceptions, attitudes, and opinions at the expense of examining contradictions in society and relations between states and society. Likewise, the study of history or the way the longue durée of Fernand Braudel has shaped mentalities was reduced to the study of recent literature inspired by old texts, as if old texts are factories of violence. A careful scrutiny of continuity and discontinuity between the evolution of movements lumped into political Islam, as often called, and the more recent emergence of violent radical groups, especially ISIS, is crucial. A little less than 2 years ago, the threats of ISIS were legitimately feared to the point of suggesting that the defeat of this organization is a severe blow to violent extremism. Today, ISIS has been defeated, or at least radically debilitated, as it was expelled from its strongholds in Raqqa and Mosul. Nonetheless, we're not sure how less violent is the region and the world in which we live today. And if true, for how long? Hearing less about spectacular atrocities, staged atrocities against civilians, or talking less about ISIS in the media, which is the case, could be misleading. For quite some time, much of the government-driven policy recommendations, as well as those who proposed policy recommendations to government, pivoted around incapacitating ISIS, while recognizing that only one part of the solution was military. The clarity of recommendations about denying territorial gains, continuing to focus on high-value targets, as they call them, and shutting down the foreign fighters' pipelines, contrasted with vague references to countering Islamist ideology. Political solutions in the combat against ISIS, political solutions were not given the importance they deserve. The centerpiece of prevention, as well as de-radicalization, was ideological and theological re-education. De-radicalization involved a shift away from the views and ideas about justifying the use of violence. It is currently not possible to draw conclusions about the merits of such approaches, or the lack thereof. To be sure, the legitimacy of violence could not be an issue limited to religious justification. Avoiding to look into the politics of savagery and the role of foreign occupation, dictators' tyranny, and social marginalization in breeding violence and justifying violence. In our region, the very conflicts and post-conflict disorder which undermined what is left of the state became, for many, a source of legitimacy, a cause for further entrenching, and for rulers, a distraction from addressing problems that they are not capable or unwilling to solve, such as in Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. It is not, therefore, a surprise to see violence, not only that is the one that is depicted as extremist, becoming a policy by default. It is therefore an enormous and manifold task to strive towards exiting violence. In our region, probably more than anywhere else. Much of the relevance of this international conference and any similar international initiative depends on its significance in a local and regional context. Holding the International Panel's restitution exercise here in Beirut speaks to this relevance. Thank you, Michel. Thank you all for making this possible. I wish all of us a rich and fruitful deliberation.
Thank you, Dr. Mitri, for this stimulating speech. I would like to introduce Fouad Siniora, former Prime Minister of Lebanon and former Minister of Finance, a graduate of AUB and friend of AUB. Please. Well, Your Excellency.
It's nice to be at AUB, actually. Let me first try to convey to you the greetings and the good wishes for a successful conference with good debates and deliberations. And these, actually, good wishes coming from His Excellency Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me this opportunity to address this distinguished group of researchers. I understand that you aim at making the theme of exiting violence a new field of your research. That is indeed a noble cause in a world where violence that is driven by populism and extremism is on the rise. But if we really want to exit violence, we need to understand that just like violence, extremism is often a symptom of a problem rather than a root of a problem. Quite often, and whenever they speak about Islamic violence, politicians, journalists, the media in general, do not make clear distinctions between various groups, and even less between concepts or quasi-concepts. Terms like Islamic, Islamist, radical Muslim, Salafist, jihadist, and terrorists are used interchangeably. And this is not correct. It is hoped that your research and this international conference will bring more precision and provide the proper tools for a better understanding of the extremist phenomenon. Actually, political violence has many root causes and could not be reduced to the influence of specific Islamic literature and jurisprudence. In my opinion, we cannot exit violence without addressing the political, the social, and the economic root causes, and consequently offering concrete alternatives to young people whose grievances and meaningless life provide a fertile ground for the acceptance of radical ideas. The unsolved problems, like the just Palestinian cause, the several political setbacks in the Arab world that happened during the past several decades, including the unresolved Syrian war and the wars in Iraq, Yemen, Libya, and Somalia, and as well the marginalization and the oppression and the injustice that is caused by decades of authoritarian regimes, have led to feelings of disappointments, frustrations, and unfulfilled promises of dignity in its wide meaning by large proportions of the Arab and Islamic population. All of these provided then a fertile land for some Arabs to take the wrong alternatives in their quest for finding solutions to the pressing problems that they are facing, and for some others who are sick-minded and who use religion to leverage these negative feelings and turn them into violence and terror. Meanwhile, and since the beginning of the 80s of the last century, the Iranian intervention in the internal affairs of several Arab states, in its quest to export its revolution based on the theological version of the Wilayat al-Faqih type across national frontiers, has added more reason to the strengthening of the extremism on the other side as a natural response. As all extremism needs opposite extremism to self-feed and sustain. The Iranian Revolution has effectively led to further violence in the region in the past years, instead of promoting peace, open-minded thinking, and better understanding of Islam among Muslims to start with, and in the world at large. Islam that is based on the principle of mercy. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. And we have not sent you, O Muhammad, except as an equal mercy to all the worlds. وَكَتَبَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ. Your Lord has decreed upon himself mercy. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no inherent problem with Islam that makes it more susceptible to violence than other religions. But there is a serious problem with the Muslim world due to decades of unsolved problems that have led to a lack of progress on political and socio-economic fronts. The road to Jerusalem has proved to be a costly one, while diverging further from Jerusalem, the just capital of Palestine. Now the roads to Damascus, Sana'a, or Baghdad seem as elusive and complex as the road to Jerusalem. That said, as moderate, liberal, Muslim, and Arab, as the silent yet overwhelming majority of the Arab and the Muslim world, we refuse to be put in a choice between Islamic fundamentalism and authoritarian regimes. The Arabs, as proven by their short-lived but highly expressive and vivid spring, long to a peaceful life of dignity in a civil society that respects their freedom of thought, faith, and expression, and equality among all components of their societies, irrespective of their differences of ethnicity or religion. They refuse to go back to an era of fear and marginalization and oppression under the pretext of escaping fundamentalism. A third way is not just possible, it is also necessary for the sake of the world and not for the sake of the people of the Arab region. To put it very clearly, we refuse to go back to a pre-Arab Spring Arab world, even as we saw it turn into a dark, long winter. Daesh and Nusra and their many sisters are directly or indirectly the children of these authoritarian regimes that have deprived us from human development at all levels under the pretext of reclaiming our lost lands and restoring our dignity, and ended up delivering nothing but more wars and deprivation, and surely even less land and less dignity. Unless fair and sustainable solutions are found to the problems that have been left simmering for too long new problems will continue to emerge, including further radicalization in the region with repercussions that go way beyond the Middle East. Building the peace and democratization process in the Middle East calls for international cooperation from the United States of America, as well as from other leading powers in Europe and the world at large, who are expected to do a bigger effort to ensure stability in the Middle East by promoting moderation and in maintaining global peace while looking for more effective measures and cooperation with the Islamic world to face and stand up to the violence together against extremism and to fight Islamophobia. Ladies and gentlemen, exiting violence should not be at the expense of our rights, our values, our hopes, and our dreams of a free, democratic, and liberal Arab world where all are equal in rights and obligations, and where solely the strong civil state is the guarantor of these rights. That said, this does not mean that we do not urgently need a major modernization and upgrading of the religious discourse in our Islamic society. No effective de-radicalization can succeed if it is limited to the good advice and sermons. Many extremists are in fact prey to political propaganda of victims of manipulation, while the inculcation of an understanding of Islam as a religion that rejects blind violence is part of a durable re-education alone is not sufficient. It has to be enhanced by providing alternative, inspired from the Muslim faith, and pointing to possibility of changing society through peaceful means. We need an approach that highlights the values of hard work, discipline, and productivity, and that encourages critical thinking in the Arab world and the Muslim world. We need a religious discourse that rises up to the level of our fast-changing world, a discourse that is adapting instead of regressing, and that opens the door to our new generation to be at peace with others through correcting the misconceptions about Islam that have been planted in their heads by diabolic minds. In brief, we do not want to scare the world, but as well, we don't want to be scared of it. Only then, with these joint efforts at the political, socio-economic, and religious levels, can we talk about a sustainable exit of violence, and not a temporary one that carries in its seeds new viruses of marginalization, oppression, and inequality and injustice that turn into roots of extremism and further violence. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to address our young men and women in our societies. You young generation should also believe in your ability to make a change in your countries and in your region, as you are the generation of the future that can fight extremism from its roots by spreading global awareness about this disease and by defending and maintaining a civilized image of your society. Ladies and gentlemen, all these goals seem to be further away than ever. I will not lie to you and tell you that it is within our reach. But the fact that they are more difficult, more elusive, more challenging, does not make them less right. Throughout our history, hope was not our only ally, but also the courage in facing reality and drawing the right lessons from the mistakes of the past. So we shall not be desperate or discouraged or turn to negative and violent thinking or accept the broken will as a destiny. I strongly believe that there are great opportunities to our region and to the world in restoring moderation, restoring proper thinking of problem solving, and in turn restoring stability and peace to the Arab world and to the world at large. That should be based on promoting common interests within the Arab world and within the world at large in making this important journey towards the future. This would be our only hope, our only choice, our only redemption. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency Fouad Siniora, for this stimulating introduction and approach on Lebanon and a word to the youth of today. Our next speaker is His Excellency Mohammed Ali Al-Hakim, a national of Iraq, as Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, ESCWA.
مساء الخير جميعاً. I will be speaking in Arabic, so there's people who spoke French and then English, and I'll be delivering my statement in Arabic. اسمحوا لي أن أتقدم بخالص الشكر إلى معهد عصام فارس للسياسات العامة والشؤون الدولية في الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت على هذه الفرصة التي أتاحها لي للتحدث في هذا المنتدى الدولي حول موضوع الخروج من العنف. وأمام هذا الحضور المتميز من الباحثين والمتخصصين والمفكرين من ذوي الباع الطويل والمشهود لهم في هذا المجال. سيدات والسادة، أن تنامي أعمال العنف وتوسع ظاهرة الإرهاب والنتائج الكارثية التي تحدثها دفع بقضية مواجهتها إلى صدارة مختلف الأجندات الوطنية والإقليمية والدولية. بيد أنه ورغم كل الجهود المبذولة لا تزال بلدانا عربية عدة تواجه مخاطر الإرهاب والعنف والحروب الداخلية وما يرتبط بها من تفتت الكيانات السياسية والوطنية. وهذا العنف المتفاقم لم يقف عند الحدود الجغرافية لتلك البلدان، بل طال بتداعياته البلدان المجاورة والبعيدة، وترك آثاراً وجروحاً دفينة من الصعب أن تندمل في كافة المجالات وعلى أكثر من صعيد. أما الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لفلسطين الذي تجاوز عامه 50 فيبقى من أهم مصادر عدم الاستقرار إن لم يكن أهمها، وكيف لا وهو مولد أساسي للعنف وللصراعات المزمنة في المنطقة العربية منذ عقود خلت. من هنا يأتي عمل الهيئة الدولية المعنية بالخروج من العنف ليسد فراغاً فكرياً وبحثياً من خلال اعتماده مقاربة شاملة ومتعددة الاختصاصات والمجالات لدراسة أشكال العنف المعاصر من منظور مقارن، مع التركيز بشكل خاص على منطقة الشرق الأوسط. فالمحاور الرئيسية المطروحة للتداول والنقاش في هذا المؤتمر تتناول العوامل والظروف التي تسمح بإنتاج ظاهرة العنف وتماديها، وتقف بنظرة تحليلية على الأبعاد الاجتماعية والسياسية والاقتصادية والثقافية الفردية المحفزة لها، كما تناقش سبل التعامل مع نتائجها والخيارات المتاحة لمواجهتها للخروج من دوامتها. ولا بد من الإشارة أيضاً إلى أن نتائج أبحاث المجموعات العاملة ضمن الهيئة الدولية المعنية بالخروج من العنف على مواضيع إعادة بناء الذات وتأهيل الأفراد والعنف الموجه ضد النساء والعدالة الانتقالية ودور التاريخ والذاكرة الفردية والجماعية ستشكل سنداً معرفياً إضافياً لبلدان عربية عدة تسعى للخروج من دوامات العنف وتعمل على إعادة ترميم نسيجها الاجتماعي. وهذا الجهد المكثف من قبل مجموعات عمل الهيئة المختلفة على مدى العامين الماضيين يتقاطع بنتائجه وأهدافه مع الجهود المبذولة منذ عقود من قبل الأمم المتحدة، وتحديداً مع أهداف خطة العمل لمنع التطرف العنيف التي أصدرها الأمين العام السابق للأمم المتحدة السيد بان كي مون في 25 كانون الثاني يناير عام 2016. ولقد تضمنت خطة عمل الأمم المتحدة موجزاً عن اتساع نطاق ما يندرج تحت مكافحة التطرف العنيف، وقدمت أكثر من 70 توصية للدول الأعضاء لكي يتم تضمينها في برنامج مكافحة التطرف العنيف الوطنية، بدءاً من مبادرات سياسات التنمية والحكم الرشيد وحقوق الإنسان إلى تمكين الشباب والمساواة بين الجنسين ودور مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي. أيها الحضور الكريم، لطالما شكل موضوع العنف الهم الأساسي لمنظومة الأمم المتحدة منذ أن أسدلت الحرب العالمية الثانية أوزارها وحتى يومنا هذا. وهذا الهم تجلى أولاً في التحول الفكري والمفاهيمي الذي أدخل على مستوى مقاربة موضع مكافحة جرائم الحرب والجرائم ضد السلام والجرائم ضد الإنسانية مع تكريس مبدأ عالمية حقوق الإنسان وسمو القانون الدولي على النظم القانونية الداخلية. كما انعكس هذا الهم ثانية في تركيز اهتمام منظومة الأمم المتحدة على حماية الأفراد من العنف ومن تأثيراته الجسدية والمعنوية عليهم كأشخاص، وليس فقط الاهتمام بالأضرار التي تلحق بكيانات الدولة. وفي خطة العمل لمنع التطرف العنيف تدعو الأمم المتحدة إلى اتباع نهج شامل لا يقتصر على اتخاذ تدابير أمنية أساسية لمكافحة الإرهاب، بل يتخطاه إلى ما هو أبعد، أي اتخاذ خطوات منهجية لمعالجة الظروف الكامنة التي تدفع الأفراد إلى الانسياق إلى التطرف والوقوع في شبكات الجماعات المتطرفة العنيفة. وتطرح الخطة نهجاً يشمل كل منظومة الأمم المتحدة لدعم الجهود الوطنية والإقليمية والعالمية الرامية إلى منع التطرف العنيف، وتدعو وكالات الأمم المتحدة إلى مساعدة الدول الأعضاء في وضع خطط عمل وطنية تطال دور الفرد والجماعات والمجتمع والدولة من أجل الإفلات من دوامة العنف والإرهاب. ففي إطار خطة العمل لمنع التطرف العنيف تضطلع المنظمات واللجان الإقليمية ودون الإقليمية بدور هام وأساسي في حل النزاعات والصراعات التي تنشأ في محيط تفويضها الجغرافي، ومن خلال إضفاء الطابع المؤسساتي على الدبلوماسية الاجتماعية والاقتصادية والتنموية والوقائية. تعمل المنظمات واللجان الإقليمية وتحديداً اللجنة الاقتصادية والاجتماعية لغرب آسيا الأسكوا على تعزيز النهج الإقليمي لمعالجة آثار العنف وتعزيز آليات الوقاية وتوطيد الاستقرار، وهي تمتلك عدة مواصفات وميزات للقيام بهذا الدور، ومن أبرزها على صعيد المثالي للحصر إلمامها بتركيبة البيئة السياسية والاجتماعية لدول المنطقة، ومعرفتها بطبيعة الصراعات المعقدة ومسبباتها وتداعياتها على المدى الطويل. ثانياً، قدرتها على تسهيل التفاوض والوساطة بين الأطراف المتنازعة لمنع تفاقم أعمال العنف أو لاحتوائها بعد نشوبها. قدرتها على إيجاد حلول واقعية للصراعات تفادياً لانتقاله وانتشاره بسبب التداخل الجغرافي والاجتماعي الشديد بين دول المنطقة. ففي مجال منع الصراعات وحل النزاعات وبناء السلام المستدام تقوم الأسكوا بالتركيز على دبلوماسية المسار الثاني، ذلك من خلال استضافة وقيادة الحوارات الفنية وإطلاق دبلوماسية المسار الثاني بين الأطراف المتنازعة على المستوى الإقليمي والوطني. ولهذه الغاية وضعت الأسكوا آليات ومنصات حوار لتأمين نهج شامل ومتعدد القطاعات وتشاركي ومراعٍ للنزاع لمعالجة قضايا الحوكمة والتحديات الاجتماعية والاقتصادية، ولتمكين أصحاب المصلحة الوطنيين من وضع حلول وإصلاحات مصممة خصيصاً لسياقاتهم الوطنية. وفي السنوات الأخيرة شرعت الأسكوا في تنفيذ مشاريع الحوار التقني في سوريا وليبيا واليمن، والتي تستند إلى هذا النهج المشترك والمبادئ الأساسية المشتركة، ولكن في التصميم يتم تخصيصها وفقاً للسياق والاحتياجات الفريدة لكل بلد. وأيضاً قدرتها على حث الدول على تفعيل دور الشباب والمرأة وإشراكهم في عمليات صنع القرار على الصعيدين الوطني والمحلي. وأيضاً مساهمتها في تصميم وتنفيذ نظم إنذار مبكر متعدد الأبعاد والمجالات لمنع نشوب الصراعات ومكافحة التطرف العنيف على المستويين الإقليمي والوطني. عقد مناقشات واجتماعات دورية مع قادة الرأي وكبار المسؤولين والخبراء وأصحاب المصلحة من أجل تحديد الاتجاهات والتهديدات الناشئة لبناء السلام في المنطقة ولتوضيح واقتراح الحلول الإقليمية لهذه المشاكل. وفي هذا المجال أيضاً تمتلك الأسكوا خبرة طويلة في استخدام البيانات الرئيسية عن الصراعات، وذلك من أجل تحليل الأسباب الجذرية لتلك الصراعات وتأثيراتها لدعم الدول الأعضاء، منها لتحديد الاتجاهات السائدة من خلال استخدام قواعد بيانات الصراع وتحسينها، وأيضاً الاستجابة بشكل تعاوني وليس تنافسي من خلال آلية تقييم إقليمية لهذه المخاطر. أن عدم تكافؤ سبل العيش وانعدام الفرص الاقتصادية على الكثيرين تؤدي إلى حياة بائسة ويائسة تفتقر ليس فقط إلى أدنى مستويات العيش الكريم، بل تتعداه إلى الافتقار لقيمة أساسية غير ملموسة ألا وهي كرامة الإنسان. وبالتالي فإن العمل على الخروج من العنف يهدف بناء مستقبل أفضل يمكن أن يبدو لنا جميعا كاستجابة تكاد تكون منطقية.